there, my name is Daniel Franco and this is the Creating Synergy podcast, your business and leadership podcast where we speak to high-profile leaders and thinkers about their careers and dig deep by asking the questions we all want the answers to, uncovering their stories, strategies, leadership lessons and their secrets to success. So welcome back to the Creating Synergy podcast. Today we have a returning guest, Mr. Adrian Tembel. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So CEO of Thomson Geer, but today we're going to be talking to you about your role as the chair of the South Australian Productivity Commission. So very, very excited. We've been thinking about this podcast for a long time.
We have, haven't we?
It's
an ambitious podcast.
It is.
We'll explain that in a moment.
But being a returning guest, I do want to. How did you find the process last time? Did you?
Look, I enjoyed it, and I was very surprised by the level of feedback I received on it. You might remember we joked about there being maybe 2 listeners, my wife and my mum. But there was actually 4. So
really,
it was much
good.
More successful than I expected.
Well
But that was terrific. I really enjoyed it, and I found it really useful.
Excellent. No, we had. I think you're probably one of the most downloaded podcasts that we've had. So very successful. We received a ton of feedback. So if you haven't listened to that one's about Adrian and his story and how he came to be the great human that he is. But I do want to point out that after that podcast, there was a nice little write-up for you in the Advertiser, wasn't there?
There was, and I think they used your podcast as a bit of a basis for that story.
They did.
So it was very efficient. So all the local media, formal and informal media, working together.
They did.
Very efficient.
Do you remember the title of what the article was?
I do. It was a bit of making fun of me. It was making fun of me because I never asked why they used that title. So the title was Tembel of Boom.
Yeah.
So it was but you know.
I know. I'm thinking surely your new nickname's Indiana. Like it's
No, but of course. It was making fun of the fact that I can be a little negative sometimes.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
Well, shouldn't it be
Tembel of Doom?
Yeah,
so
Tembel
of
of Doom.
Negative
Yeah.
things, so therefore, making fun of me a little and trying to say that I'm more constructive than people think.
Well done. Yes. No,
Did you think that? Do you think that's what it meant?
Well, it said Tembel of Boom, and I know you being really passionate about South Australia and the opportunity that we do have. So I took it as the way it was written. But I did have a laugh, and I was. Yeah. I mean, a bit of Harrison Ford about you.
I don't think that was, but it was making fun of me. But it's actually, I'm glad you started there because it goes to the heart of, I hope, what we talk about today, which is we can boom as a state, but we have to do some hard work to get there. Sometimes that means hard conversations and talking about things that we don't like talking about. So, doom to boom, maybe that's the next line we have to work on. Yeah,
we'll touch on some of those points going through it. And just a shout out to the Advertiser, it was a great article. But just mention the podcast next time because I think you were quoted a few times in there and they didn't give us a plug. I pay my $22 subscription fee every single month, so give us a plug next time.
Of course.
No, but all jokes aside, you are running one of the biggest legal firms here or the biggest legal firm here in South Australia, and one of the, I think, around about the top 10 in Australia. But we're going to talk to you about your role as SA Productivity Commission Chair. Can you please start off with just explaining your role as the Productivity Chair, if you could?
No, very pleased to. And the former Premier Stephen Marshall had a real ambition to inject, I believe, real economic discipline and good economic policy across SA government. And so one of his election promises was, prior to winning in 2018, was to create a productivity commission in the form of the federal body, which I think over the years has been around for decades, used to be viewed a little sceptically, particularly by the progressive or left side of politics, as maybe being a little right-wing or too rational and a bit too hard. But over the years, I think that federal body has won a great deal of respect for being a source of evidence-based independent thinking that can inform the community and particularly the political class. So Stephen wanted to create that here in SA, our own little mini version of it. I think it was great policy. I always believed in it. He got me involved. I was delighted. And I became the chairman, just not long before the last state election. So, of course, it was Stephen's baby or the Liberal Party's baby, but to the great credit, I believe, of the new government, the Malinowskis government, they've embraced it. Peter also believes in it and is looking forward to hopefully the body continuing and hopefully getting better at providing good sources of independent, evidence-based thinking that can assist us being a great state.
So where does this evidence come from?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's so much data out there. There's so many facts, but a lot of it is hidden away. And it takes people like, the South Australian Productivity Commission, the team and myself, to find it, understand it, and try and translate it into what it means and what it means to policy in the future in the state. So it sounds dull. And, Daniel, one of the challenges you and I have today is to turn what could be a little bit of a dull topic into something, the state economy, into something that is interesting and useful. And that's our objective. Yeah. And I hope we achieve it.
Well, and we will point out this is a South Australian focused podcast.
SA.
And
absolutely.
and really I think what we want to go through today is some of your viewpoints as the chair, but you've been a bit controversial with some of your thoughts. Is that correct in saying that?
I think that's fair. I think, look, I can tend to come across sometimes as being a little, not negative, like I said in the opening remarks, but a little bit focused on the bad rather than the good. A bit like an opposition leader or a contrarian. I don't think that's me, but it can come across that way. And I've operated my business career that way. I was quite a critic of earlier management of my law firm. I believed that I was right. It could have been viewed as a little divisive at the time, but over time, I think the thinking was validated, and so that gives me confidence as I get older to back my instincts and my judgments and say things that might not make me popular, but I hope over time are useful and might even lead to those views being respected one day. So that's why I'm here. I don't expect anyone to say, gee, he's a nice guy and I want to follow him to the end of the earth. But hopefully there's something meaningful in what I say and it's of use to some people.
You're a half glass full critic though, right? Because you say it from the point of view of, I love South Australia and I want it to grow.
I'm one of these, and marketing consultants hate me. In professional services. I've worked with plenty of them in my business career.
Why is that?
Because generally speaking, the marketing consultants would come to us and say, we can market you to greatness. And I would say, I think we can be great, but we've got a lot of hard work to do to build our capability and to be the best we can before we start advertising how great we are. So let's put all that on hold. And let's look at ourselves to be faster, fitter, better educated, more competitive. And then when we've achieved all of those things, we can communicate facts about how great we are, and they'll be real, and people will believe it and will be then successful. So I'm a little bit from that school of I'm an optimist. I believe we can be great. I think most things are possible, but you've got to do the hard work to get there, which means sometimes early on in the cycle, it's not as much fun as we'd like.
No, it's not. But I do like the approach. I mean, put the horse before the cart, right? That's essentially what you're doing, which is...
Well, I if you don't mind me jumping in, and I think this applies to your business, my business, your family, my family, a sporting club, a state, a country. You really have to accept that if you're going to get better, who would say that there's an easy way to get there? Most of us would say, let's use a sporting club example in particular. If you're if you didn't make finals, and AFL finals start, the week after next, so it's topical. If you didn't make finals this year, do any of the fans of that club, that's Adelaide and Port Adelaide, does anyone believe that there's an easy way back? Or do the fans believe that you've got to make some changes, maybe train a little bit differently, work really hard over the summer, and then you might make finals next year? So I don't think anyone in the community ever believes that there's an easy way to greatness. But sometimes, I'd be interested in your views, sometimes our political leaders feel obliged to say we can make things better, but there's an easy way to get there. You know, they almost feel I almost feel sometimes that they feel that they don't want to put the pressure on the electorate or make them feel that there's going to have to be some compromise or some pain along the way. And that's unfortunate, because then maybe they're not telling the full story of the pathway to greatness.
I think, is it just a poor form of communication? I mean, anyone in a senior role like that would clearly understand nothing's easy, right? There's a lot of moving parts within that
I
change.
just think politics is such a tough business.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be viewed, you know, it's hard to get elected when you're a pessimist or when you're saying we all have to tighten our belts. I mean, that's not a great pathway to winning votes. I accept that. But still, sometimes I think that if we can just communicate a little better around the challenges we face, then we're better able to solve them and really get to a sustainable place of success.
Right, we're not here to solve the world of politics.
No. I'm not a politician.
But is
never will be.
But is that your role? Is that your role as productivity?
Well,
is to point out those facts?
Well, certainly my role is to stay out of politics, and I do.
Yeah.
And I'm like you. I'm an Australian citizen, so I vote. I'm obliged to. But when it comes to my role as the chairman of the Productivity Commission, it's free of politics. I've got zero interest in it. It's all about SA and the best information possible that could assist those who really are the leaders, like our current premier or, you know, our opposition leader.
Brilliant. All right, well, let's get into what we're really keen to discuss. And you and I have been having this conversation for quite some time about getting this podcast together. You came to me and said, Dan, I wouldn't mind challenging the state's economic policies and putting it out there for people to listen to, and I'd love to do it through your platform. So thank you for reaching it out. I don't normally do the policy stuff; it's not my strong game. So I am really going to come at this from a person who is curious. That is going to be my position, and I'm going to learn what your thought process is. And we are going to share. And as we said, it may be controversial. It may be different to what some others believe. If there's anyone out there who's keen to come in and counteract or counter-challenge this back, then I'd love to have you on the show as well. So feel free to reach out. But we're here to challenge the economic policies that the state has in place and has been in for the past 30 years. Can you tell us what those government policies are first, please?
Yeah, and do you mind, before I do that, just to set the scene, because I'm very keen to do that, and I've done that in a few speeches that you've heard.
Yeah.
My thesis essentially is that we have to just leave anecdotes at the door. Mm-hmm. That is, we've just won a particular company to Adelaide, so we're great. That's an anecdote. That's just a single standalone event. It doesn't mean that the economy is stronger.
Yep.
Leave that at the door, and let's try to leave opinion at the door as well, and let's focus on evidence and facts. So I always start from the point of view of what is the state of our economy? Mm-hmm. What's the true state? And what I look at, and I've got my economist hat on, mm-hmm. And my policy hat on. You have to look at the long-term facts, and you have to look objectively at how we compare, in particular, to other states of Australia. And when you do that for our state, it's grim. Mm-hmm. And I go back 30 years, as you say. I use the State Bank, I won't call it disaster, but setback in the early 90s as a starting point for modern SA. And what I say is things haven't really worked that well since. So what do you mean by that? So first of all, you build the picture up. We're an ageing population. Mm-hmm. We have structurally become older over that period. And so that's viewed as a challenge mm-hmm. from a healthcare system point of view. So that's point one. And relative to other states, we are older. Mm-hmm. So that gives us, that's a bit more of a burden on future generations. The second point is we're less educated. Mm-hmm. So the percentage of our workforce, the 25 to 44-year-old, the engine room of an economy, mm-hmm. South Australians are structurally less educated than in other states. For example, in all the other states except for Queensland, the biggest portion of workers in that 25 to 44 cohort have got university degrees.
Yeah.
In our state, that's the smallest portion of our workforce. So it just gives you a taste of the fact that we're older than the other states.
What does that mean though? Like I get it from a innovation point of view. We obviously don't have the big companies here attracting those talent. Is there an exodus of those, or is it?
There might be.
Yeah.
It might well be that because we haven't had the jobs, that people have left. But on education, that's a really good point, because that's been put to me. So when I've said before that we've got a less educated workforce, people say, well, we've lost people. So is that our fault? I think it actually is, but let's just pause that. But there's another important fact as well, which is that less of our school leavers go into higher education or jobs. So it's a statistic around 65% of our school leavers go into higher education and jobs. The national average is more 73 or 74%. So something's going on in our pre-university education system, which means that we're generating less people that go on to build higher levels of skills, which means less people going on to higher levels of income and value creation, which is what we all aspire to. If you look at the last few years, the narrative's gone from employment, because we've got very low unemployment, that we need jobs, to we want well-paid jobs. And lack of wages growth has become a real issue. And no one likes lack of wages growth, particularly South Australians. So that's an issue we have to solve. So, sorry, I've segued there, but just going back to you, there's an issue with the level of education in our state, and that's a key marker of future economic success. So that's a second weakness. The third weakness that I really keep an eye on is the types of jobs that we have been creating in SA over the last 25 to 30 years. And essentially, there's been, I wouldn't call it an explosion, but significant growth in jobs in administration, government, aged care, healthcare. So basically jobs which are inward looking. We're administering or we're caring for ourselves. There's no export element to there. There's very limited growth opportunities. And generally those jobs are not as well paid as working for a high value add exporter, a drug company or a tech company that's taking on the world and making big profit margins. So there's been a real growth in those jobs.
Well, you can see the clear link between the education and the jobs.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you're right. We'll build a picture up. That makes sense. And then there's another, just makes anecdotal sense, doesn't it? That the jobs of that nature are growing. We're getting older. That makes sense. We're triggering more need for those types of jobs as well. But they're not high paid jobs. The career path's not necessarily as interesting as joining in the ground level a large exporter that has, the world at its feet.
Yeah, or a young startup.
And so the education levels are lower. Those jobs are growing. And the jobs, of course, that have contracted over that period were manufacturing jobs. So these were jobs which were industrial and could lead to value add and maybe export. They've contracted. And meanwhile, Daniel, with all of that, the percentage of public sector or the public sector wage bill over the last 20 years has risen from 8% of gross state product to 9%. Might not seem like a lot, but our gross state product's about 115 billion. So we've started to, as a percentage of the state, there's another $1 billion that's gone into public sector wages. Now, I'm not here to be negative about the public sector, but you start to build a picture of an economy over the last 25, 30 years. It's older, less educated, more inward looking, bigger government.
Well, I can talk to that for a bit if I will. And I come from my background from a nationality and heritage point of view is Italian point of view. So parents have come in from overseas. Well, my dad was born here, but he was a young Italian family as well when they only just arrived when he was born. So growing up in a world of security is what was really important to them, right? If you think of from a value set point of view, I remember, and I have previously worked for government before this podcast and me starting my own business. And I remember when I got the role within government, the words that came out of my parents' mouth, or even just their attitude was, right, now you're safe. Yeah. You're safe. You're okay. You will do okay. And then I remember when I left, there were people in my community or family community that would say, why would you leave the comfort of a government role? So there is very much a...
That's a very good story. I think that's a really important story. I had the same thing. My mother wanted me to work at ETSA, the old electricity trust, because she thought that was secure. She still repeats it to this day. Now, it's an interesting example of the psychology of our state, isn't it? That two of us sitting here randomly both had the experiences of the government being a good source of security. Government's important, but it doesn't really grow the state in the way we want it to. We want higher wages here, and I'll come to wages in a moment, how they compare. So to do that, we have to grow, and true growth, sustainable growth that creates wealth, of course, is in the private sector. Yep. So it's interesting there, but I think there's another really important element to that. In parallel with that phenomenon that you just described, there was also the protected manufacturing industries that you grew up a little bit with, but I did as well. White goods, textiles, motor vehicles. Yeah. And they were quite well-paid jobs as well. They were protected by the federal government. So they had a semi-government nature to them. And they were great stepping stones for whole families to go from, working class migrant, get their kids educated. So they were very useful jobs and industries at the time, but that's all vanished. Yeah. What have we replaced those industries with? We've been trying to replace them now for the last 25 years with future jobs. But that data I just presented to you before, that the real growth has been in administration, healthcare, inward-looking jobs, is a sign that we're not diversifying our economy successfully. Hence, we'll get to this later in the podcast, are our policies working? Because there hasn't been a state government since 1991, 92 of both political persuasions that hasn't said our objective is to diversify the economy and pursue higher value jobs through innovation technology. That's a 30-year-old story. Yeah. But Daniel, what I challenge is, has it worked? And that's the big debate that I'm having, with you and hopefully others in the future.
Well, to play devil's advocate, I don't know if you've got these numbers in front of you. If you look at that growth percentage from 8% to 9% in the public sector from a wage bill, do you have the statistics from private industry? Is there a growth in that area too, or is it just...
Well, what that statistic, remember what it shows. It doesn't say that the wages bill has gone up. Okay. It says that it's gone up as a percentage of the economy. Okay. So if you think about the economy, it's 100%. Yep. And 8% of it is a public sector wage bill, and that's become 9%. So you might say 1%, Adrian. Really, is it really material? But I think coupled with the other data, it shows a trend of government becoming more central to the economy. And that, my argument is that is not consistent with wanting a high wage, high growth economy.
Yeah. And is that what we want?
Well, I'd be very surprised. A good question. Yeah. Because exactly going back to your point, well, your mum and my mum wanted job security. So are people happy if they earn less, but they have more secure and simple and comfortable lives? That might be the case. That might be the case. And that's for the political class to work out every 4 years at election time. That's not a matter for me. But what I say is, most people will say, and if you look at the last federal election in particular, it was, we need to fix low wages. We need to create wages growth. So I say, well, if you want wages growth, then you need to get the right policies to do it, because the last 25 years of policies here, at least at state level, I don't think have delivered in that respect. And just if I can just go to that point, it's very, very relevant to wages. Yeah. Productivity in Australia over the last, if we measure it over the last 25 years, is viewed as having not progressed well, particularly in the last 5 years. But our productivity growth is often blamed for our low wages growth in Australia.
Can you explain productivity?
Well, productivity is you put in a unit of time and you put in a unit of capital and you get an output. Okay. You create this, coffee cup. Yep. And then next year, if we put the same units in, but we create 1.5 coffee cups for the same units, that means our productivity has risen by, 50%.
Yep, makes sense.
Now, with the same amount of inputs, we're creating more. So guess what? That's going to be more profit. And the theory is that more of that profit trickles back into wages. Now, the unions and the right-wingers will debate that, but let's just leave that aside.
Yep.
The reality is the economy will be stronger if we're more productive, if we're doing more today than we used to do yesterday with the same level of input. So in Australia, the level of that growth, the amount of more coffee cups we're producing has been very flat and is criticised. But in SA, but there has been growth.
Yeah.
Modest growth, but there's been growth.
In Australia.
In Australia.
Yeah.
In SA over the same period, it's actually gone backwards. So over the last 25 years, and you see my graph here,
Yep.
you can see the red goes down, the yellow goes up. What that means is that over the last 25 years, just using this example, we used to make 1 coffee cup an hour with a worker and the machine, and now we make about 3/4 of a coffee cup an hour.
That's a problem.
So it's hard. Well, I think it is, because it's hard to justify higher wages and a better standard of living and better schools and better hospitals and more police if we're not doing more. In fact, we're doing a little bit less.
Will you take out the Mitsubishis and the Holdens from that graph? Is that why? Is it those industries or?
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. But whether it is or not, that's done. And that's Mitsubishi left here a long time ago, Holden more recently. There's a long-term trend here around the growth of the jobs I described before. But there's not this parallel growth in these export jobs, which which are a sign of competitiveness and quite high-value jobs. Now, on exports, if we can go to that, if you don't mind, that's another key metric. At the beginning of the century, my apologies, 2000, South Australia produced 8.2% of the country's exports, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But now we're down to 3.2%. And in fact, the last goods export data, the export of goods, not services, but goods, we're down to 2.7%. So if you analyse that, that's starting to look very, very small. We're about 6% of the national economy, but we're now less than 3% of national goods exports. Now, that could be a sign of lack of competitiveness, because exporting into the global market, you have to be super competitive because you're competing with the whole world.
Yeah.
People will only buy your services or goods or commodities if you do it really, really well. And our state has gone backwards. Now, we have grown marginally our exports over that period, but the other states are racing ahead. Partly it's gas, partly it's iron ore, but you can't keep using that as an excuse to say, Queensland and WA are booming, hence, we're just drifting back, but we're still okay. The reality is we're not keeping up, and that means that our kids will have less money spent on them in schools, our parents less money in hospitals because our economy is getting smaller and poorer. Yeah. So I think these issues are important. Just one final point before I pause is that our wages are lower than other Australian wages, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And that trend is in the wrong direction. They've actually softened steadily over that last 25 years. So we're just earning less than other Australians. And again, I don't like the fact that we're getting poorer than the rest of the country.
That's a problem. On the exports piece, right? And we'll probably jump into later on what your thoughts are and what the state should concentrate on. But from a defence point of view, if we are known as the defence state, does that affect the export? I mean, the defence work doesn't go towards exports, does it?
Well, it could. It could spawn an export industry, and the dream of the recent federal governments, and you remember Christopher Pyne, a very prominent South Australian, was quite central to the attempt by the federal government to reindustrialise Australia, and that project continues, and we hope it's successful. The hope has always been that we will produce, for example, a new generation of submarines, and that could be not just the development of a sovereign industry and capability, but also be the springboard for innovation and therefore exports of defence products. And I think there might be some beginnings of that, but it's very, very early days.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. The defence sector is an opportunity for our state.
Yeah.
But I'll just say one thing. There's always a but with me, and I accept that. But you don't want to put your eggs all in one basket.
No.
Because as we've learnt with defence, if you look at the cancellation of the Naval contract, I think it was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah. You can get wiped out.
It just shows you how volatile things can be if you rely on one sector. And that's one sector that is also captive to geopolitical risks. So very suddenly, the whole pipeline of work can be cancelled, as it was. And there's still uncertainty as to what will happen next with AUKUS. Will we make our own nuclear subs? Will they be built elsewhere? And so on.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. You don't know. No one knows the answer. But again, SA's got it, and we should push hard, but we can't rely on it to solve all our problems.
We need to do something else. But
Of course we do.
I want to ask the question, and going back to the exports, I think that my point is exports a measure of growth?
It has to be, doesn't it?
Is it the only measure, though?
Well, it's not the only measure, but if you're a small economy like us and all you do is do business between yourselves, we know the principles of free trade mean that if everyone else is involved in trade and we're not, we will grow at a slower rate, obviously. So by definition, we will get poorer than the other states or other countries that are trading with the world and focusing on comparative advantage, the most efficient use of resources, than if we are an inward-looking economy. So if we made all our own fridges and cars, we'd be so poor because they would be so expensive. We'd all have all the industries here, but because they've got small scale, the price would be huge. And you and I would have no money to actually buy a car, you know, like the old Soviet Union.
Who, excuse the ignorance in this question, who is the biggest exporter in Australia? Which state?
I don't know that off the top of my head by absolute numbers, but WA and Queensland are leading the way by a long, long way. I'd say WA is the biggest exporter on gross numbers because of iron ore, but of course gas from Queensland is enormous as well. So remember, we're a commodity exporter. When you take out agriculture, minerals and other natural resources, we don't do much more, but the other states are way ahead of us.
Thank you. So in regards to the current policies, right, you've set up this, you've set a good picture, you've painted the Temple of Doom.
Temple of Doom, yes. No, you're quite right.
And so you're saying, what I'm hearing come out in your language is this has been the same way for the past 30 years, which means there's consensus in these government policies.
Yeah, I believe so. As I've said, we're older, we're less productive, government's getting bigger, wages aren't growing.
So why isn't new government coming in and...
Well, this is where, again, we don't want to go into politics. That's not our job here today. But addressing our growth problem, I think, is a key priority. Over the last 30 years, we've grown at 2.1% per year, the country at 2.9%. So every year, the country goes further ahead of us. So I say we've got, it's simple, a growth problem. And then exactly what you're leading into is, well, what is the solution? Have we been doing the same thing for the last 25 years? And I believe we have. The consensus in this state for at least that period is that government, the state government, probably the biggest player in our economy, 100,000 employees, spends $20 billion plus per year in an economy of 115. So it's probably, in direct terms, it's close to 20% of our economy. So it's huge. And it makes laws and it can create leadership because people want to watch them on television. So that state government can have a huge impact on the future of this state. We shouldn't always look to government to solve it. It can have a huge impact. And the consensus has been that government will not just facilitate and step back, but that it will drive and create jobs, and that it will have a very interventionist industry policy that involves whether it's the development of precincts or government grants or trade missions or marketing the state or giving business services, training people how to be businesses. All of that coupled with, particularly for the last 15 years, continuous infrastructure spend, so stimulating the building industry and then helping businesses win customers and to raise capital and to create businesses and to create industries. Our state governments have been very central in creating industry plans. So they're right in the middle of the action. They're saying, we're going to help you create industries and create plans.
Hold your hand.
going to give you money. And on our, the Productivity Commission, it's probably directly maybe $350, $400 million a year after year after year. We're going to spend that, and we're going to help, in partnership with business, we're going to help create this economy. And I say that if that's worked, then you're going to have to find some good evidence to show that it has, because all of the macro data, and I've got more that I didn't describe before, we might come to it, shows that it's not working, because over the long term, we continue to underperform the other states. So are those industry policies and that infrastructure stimulus, are they working? And I say, I don't think they have. But if they have, produce the evidence so we don't spend another 25 years doing the same things that may not work over that period.
So let's paint a picture, right? If we continue on this merry path, what does South Australia look like in 25 years if we don't change this?
I think you can extrapolate what's happened in the last 25 over the next 25. Maybe we'll have some good luck and something will drop out of the air. Maybe they'll build 50 submarines at Osborne. Unlikely.
We don't want to.
Maybe there will be a hydrogen boom, and the whole world will come here and invest tens of billions of dollars. Maybe. Unlikely. The reality is that if we keep doing the same things, like with most things in life, you will get the same outcomes. And so that's my big challenge. And I really want the bureaucracy or the academics to challenge me on this and say, no, these policies have worked. They have been money well spent, and to produce independent, credible evidence to verify that, so we can all be comfortable and you and I can go off and do other things.
Yeah, have a couple of wines. If they're producing evidence, though, then they need to produce evidence that it'll continue working for the next 25 years, though, right?
Sure, of course.
And that, for me, is the biggest issue. I'm a proud South Australian. Like, I want to live in a state that is continuously growing and invested in its own growth. But am I sitting in a minority?
Yeah. I mean, there's the growth problem, and we've also got, just to finish the picture, and let's just dive into that, I think we also have a fiscal problem. I think our level of state debt, which has basically gone from 15 years ago from around $1.5 billion, so basically no debt, over the next 3 years, it's going to have grown to about $34 billion. And in 3 or 4 years, we're forecast to be paying interest of $1.2 billion a year, just interest. Just interest. So think about what we could do if we didn't have to pay interest. We could pay $1.2 billion. Now, that's not suggesting that all of that debt was spent on unconstructive activities, but you'd have to ask yourself this. In 2000, and you've lived through that period, in 2007, essentially, we were debt-free. In the next 2 or 3 years, we'll get to 34. That's the forecast in the budget papers. Do we have $34 billion of value that we've invested that makes us an incredibly more dynamic, productive, and high-growth economy? You have to ask yourself that. Yes, we've got a new hospital. We've got some new roads.
But $34 billion?
$34 billion's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot.
And we're still in spending mode. So I think we've got a fiscal problem and we've got a growth problem, and they are the two issues. I don't want to go beyond that because we'll make this podcast too broad. They're the two issues that I think we have to face up to.
So a growth problem and a
fiscal problem. I think we've got a debt issue. Because debt, up until recently, when inflation suddenly occurred, there was all this talk that debt doesn't matter because interest rates are low, and all you have to worry about is servicing debt, and interest rates are going to stay low for, not forever, but for many, many, many years. And all of a sudden over Christmas, that all changed, and suddenly debt does matter. Debt always matters. Inflation is always a risk, and it was always high risk that we would grow our debt heavily because external shocks happen. Things go wrong. Countries invade each other. there are oil shocks. COVID occurs. There'll be cyber risks. There will be a stock market collapse.
Yep.
And if you're not in control of your debt level, then you won't have the money to spend with the next crisis.
Yep.
And so if we're at 34 and interest rates continue to rise, what happens if there's conflict in Taiwan and we have a heavy recession in Australia? Do we have the capacity to borrow another 5 or 6 billion and to go and stimulate our economy to protect our families? Maybe, but we're starting to get on the edge. And what about the next time? So we have to manage that debt level so that we can respond to opportunities but risks in the future. And I believe we're at a little bit of a delicate stage. And I think we need bipartisan discussion on what is our sustainable debt level to ensure that we're not, or that we are appropriately protecting future generations.
There's so much in that. My question, though, coming back to paint a picture, like you said, we could use the data and have a look at it, and it doesn't look so great. But what if we are going to visualise the state of South Australia? Right, I'm going to use an extreme example. Is it broken windows when you walk down the street? What does it look like from the point of view of being in this state?
Well,
will we attract talent, and will we? What happens?
So I think what a really important point to make is that at the outset here is that the narrative, particularly in our state over that whole period, has been to create jobs, to get unemployment down. We've had relatively higher unemployment. We still have the highest unemployment in the country, but it's at 4%. The country's in the 3s now. So we have at the moment historically very low levels of unemployment, which is great because A, everyone's got a job if they want one, but B, that means there's a lot more scope for reform when everyone's got a job. So if we were at 10% unemployment, it's going to be very hard for me to say, let's reform the public sector to create fiscal repair that then allows us to have the economic platform for future growth. But I think it's very sensible and balanced to say it when we have such low levels of unemployment. And in fact, private sector employers in Adelaide are saying we need more workers and we can't find them. You said that to me before this podcast. So the ability to say, let's look at our spending and let's reform it in a way that makes it sustainable so we don't have to borrow money every year, I think is more possible now than ever before. So that image you have of smashed glass, and people, the garbage isn't being collected because we've got austerity and we're just squeezing so tightly that we're all living in a really, really difficult situation. I'm not sure that's the right image at the moment.
Okay.
But still, I accept that reform takes courage and there's sometimes pain.
So why is this a big problem for South Australia?
Because I think, like I said before, for two reasons, two key on fiscal. Let's just focus on fiscal. Can we, with those climbing debt levels, with the risk of higher interest rates, can we afford another COVID in 2 years' time? Okay. So we'd have to, let's say we spent round numbers stimulating the economy with, say, we borrowed, let's just say $5-6 billion.
Yeah.
Could we go to 40? Maybe. But what if interest rates went up by then to 5%? Quite foreseeable. That would mean that we'd be spending almost $2 billion of interest a year. Can we afford another? We're at 1.2 in 3 years' time. So could we afford to spend another $1 billion a year on interest with all the pressure on healthcare and schools in 6 or 7 years' time? If there was another COVID, or there was a huge cyber attack, or there was a war in Taiwan. Could we afford that? That's my question to you. Now, you say maybe, but you'd start to feel a bit wobbly, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Our credit rating would be reduced, our interest charges would go up, and Daniel, that's before we even talk about the repayment of that debt. So that's the defensive side of this.
Yeah.
The offensive side is this. Hydrogen could be a great new industry for our state. It could be. I've just done some work on it. It's got lots of challenges, but it's got lots of opportunities. And the state should do its absolute best to grab the opportunity. My view, though, is that to win some of that foreign investment to maybe, or interstate investment to build hydrogen export industry, It might well be that it'll help a great deal if our state government can co-fund some of the infrastructure, ports, cheap energy, water. Queensland and WA, who have got the lion's share of active hydrogen projects today, it's a race to try to win this battle. We'll throw a great deal of money at it, and they have the infrastructure. We arguably won't have the capacity to say, yes, our debt position's so strong, it's very manageable. If we need to write a check for $2 billion and invest in the future, we can do it. That won't be the case if our fiscal position continues to weaken. Because remember, there's high levels of state debt in some of the other states, particularly Queensland, but they've got a growth history. They've got the Olympics. They've got gas. They've got tourism. They're bigger. They have a huge level of internal individuals wanting to move there, from Melbourne, the phenomena of... So they've got growth. We don't have a growth record. So our ability to sustain higher levels of debt is nowhere near what the bigger states are. So that's why I say fiscal is an issue from a defensive point of view, but an offensive point of view. And I would love to see some bipartisan decision on what our sustainable debt levels actually are. So we then have realistic expectations of what our governments can do. And that, for example, is north-south. That if we go ahead with that, it's a lot of money. We need to make sure we do a very sensible assessment and decision on whether we can afford it.
So why are all the other states so much more advanced? You talk about Queensland. Queensland, we've got a weather
Natural,
attracts a lot.
They got that wonderful climate.
And
the wonderful far north
can't argue that at all, right? So let's take that out. But let's take Queensland out of this comment then. Why is South Australia always lagging behind other states?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked, because previous political leaders have said, and I'm not being critical of them, they've said, look, it's always been the way. We don't, we're a desert. We don't, as you say, we don't have that tropical climate or maybe some of the natural beauty. We're remote. We don't have the water. And so federation, because the federal system helps us, federation, the countries, the states, they're federated, we should be supported. Because we're often criticised by the big, more powerful states as always putting our hands out for support. And the feedback is, stand on your own 2 feet. And previous leaders of this state have said, fair enough, we should be given extra support because we're not as fortunate, just as you said, we don't have all that gas and all that iron ore as others. Now, I always say, I think we've got plenty of value here. And we've got plenty of natural beauty. We just have to see it for what it is. But equally, I always just use 2 words, Singapore and Israel. And these are 2 of the most dynamic, extraordinary economies in the world. One's tiny on a swamp, and the other is in the middle of a desert where it's much drier and hotter than here. I can tell you in the summer. It's not much fun there. I've been there. And surrounded by enemy combatants. So you can do anything. The future of our economy is its people. And sorry, Daniel, I just want to say this, that I just want, and I know there's so many people that feel the same way, that we don't want to be apologetic for being South Australian. We want to be proud. And so we need to have a mentality where we will compete and not always say, but it's unfair for us, so we need a bit of extra welfare from Canberra.
The Israel and Singapore, different position. Their backs are up against the wall. They've got no. So South Australia seems to, like you said, hold its hand out more so than more than others. But why is that acceptable? I live here. I love this state. I'm a proud South Australian, but I get frustrated hearing that these policies haven't worked. I get frustrated hearing those statistics saying that things are going backwards. I get told, being an entrepreneur and starting my own business in this state, saying, if you can do business in South Australia, you can do it anywhere. Why does this always come up? Why can't we be a front runner and a leader in this country or in the world?
It's complex, but I've used this phrase before. There's that famous book by Donald Horne, The Lucky Country, and that describes Australia. I think SA is a little like that as well, on a much smaller scale, of course, because federation helps us. The the way GST money is distributed, we get more than the share that we should otherwise be entitled to because of the way it's calculated. We've got more as a percentage of our population, members of parliament in Canberra. We've got the defence industry here. And then we're just part of Australia, this amazing country with all these commodity exports that makes us rich, record terms of trade at the moment. So look, Daniel, I don't know the answer to that. We've all got our opinions, but as a matter of fact, is it just that we've been so fortunate that we're in this extraordinary country, and so we've been able to live still very, very well, and not have to necessarily challenge ourselves in the way that you just said that a Singapore and Israel has had to.
What, in your opinion, needs to be done to turn this ship around?
So can we just? No, thank you. So can we just? I raised two issues to be succinct: fiscal and growth.
Yep.
And we just put fiscal to bed. All I would hope for at the moment is that the issue is on the table. I think there's been real silence in South Australia for some time now about debt affordability amongst the political class. And I just would hope that both sides of politics would focus in on this issue even more. And look, I might get criticised for saying that. The Treasurer might say, Adrian, I have. And the Shadow Treasurer might say, Adrian, I have, and maybe I haven't seen it. Maybe it hasn't had the media attention. I think, in fairness, that Stephen Mulligan, who's a very competent person, is honing in on the issues. But I would just love to see maybe a little bit more bipartisanship on this to say, what is that natural level of debt that we can afford, and do we need to engage in fiscal repair? So that can we leave that aside?
We can.
On growth, that's the more exciting stuff, because the fiscal is to get the platform right. Now we want to build on that platform. Fiscal, build on the platform. I've said it before and I'll say it again till I'm blue in the face. Education and research will be our salvation. Lifting the quality and output of our schools, reforming, I believe, our university system. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm a huge supporter of the current government's commission into South Australian universities and contemplating a merger, just so at least we're looking at them as a source of growth and they're an engine room of activity, and work out what is the best way for those three universities to act as the engine room of the state. So that's a key area, and the state's doing that, so I think that's terrific. But on top of that...
So sorry, just on that, are you saying that there is going to be a merger, or they're looking into it?
No, they're looking to the policy is we want to examine a merger.
Yeah.
We have an expert commission looking at the pros and cons. But really what that policy is we want to look closely at the universities and make sure that they are operating in the best possible way for the South Australian economy. And I think that's an activist policy position, and I think it's excellent. I think it's entirely appropriate.
And is the point of that because right now we've got three universities competing for the same talent and effectively not being in the top 100?
We haven't got a top 100, as you know.
Yeah.
So every state, every mainland state, I don't think Tasmania has a top 100 university except for SA. So WA, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and ANU in Canberra as well. But more than that, they've all got a pretty strong number two. We don't. So when you go to the university, Adelaide's first at maybe around the 130 mark, depending on which index. But after that, it falls away a long way to the University of SA in Flint, out in the 400s mark. While the other states most of them have, there's a QUT or there's a University of New South Wales or there's a Monash. So there's a lack of depth as well. Now we're smaller, but look, I'll just come back to this. Universities have got such potential to be a source of or a form of renaissance of our economy that I don't think we can just ignore them. We have to tackle them. And I think it's terrific that the government is actually tackling the issue and looking closely at it. On top of all of that, I argue strongly that we need a much more powerful and well-funded applied research sector. So to put some colour on this, you've heard of the Fraunhofer Institute or institutes in Germany. It's probably one of the key drivers of why it's an industrial powerhouse. The Fraunhofer Institute has, I think, 74 different sub-institutes, thousands, I think 30,000 in total, scientists and engineers. It generates 750 on average patents a year. We need our own mini version of that in SA in the right sectors. And I'm not going to say which sectors it should be. That's beyond me. I haven't done the work. But we need to look closely at how we link the high schools to the universities and then into industry and have an applied research engine room. And I argue over and over again, and I'll keep repeating it, that our public sector spend of well over $20 billion, if only we could more efficiently spend some of that money on creating a greater applied research ecosystem in this state through the creation of an equivalent of a Fraunhofer. If only we could do that, because if we could, we'd retain our best and brightest, and this would be just an attraction of industry that would create long-term industrial strength. So look, it's a bit simplistic. We could go into a lot more detail, and we'll do that on podcast 3. But my fundamental message is that education and research should be the highest priority for our state government. And there's a pathway there, but it requires reform and a reallocation of current spending.
So if we focus all of our attention, or a lot of our attention, on the research and universities, obviously there's a clear link, right? You have a top-performing, top 100 university. You attract some amazing talent to the state. You then keep those people because the research is here, right?
Yeah,
Obviously,
it's simple.
It's very simple.
It's very simple.
But how long does that take? Like how long will?
Yes.
And when will we see the benefits of that?
It's a fair point, and this is where it gets difficult politically, because the key point I make is, yes, we do have a very bright future where we can be an industrial powerhouse, but there's no short-term solution. This will take a long time, not hundreds of years, but a decade or two. And secondly, there's no easy way, because to do it, you have to change what you're doing today. And that means none of us like change. Yeah. So it is ambitious. It does take a long time. It can't be the only economic activity, because you've got to deal with a short-term issue as well. But if you want a blueprint of how to actually make sure that the next 30 years is effective and that the government can say at the end of it, actually, this time it did work, I believe this is the framework to pursue, rather than the existing framework of corporate welfare, holding your hand, as you said, which won't create a robust competitive industry.
You said there, and it just stuck out of me, because it's something, I work in a business that manages change for large organisations, and you said there, no one likes change. The alternative of going down this path doesn't seem like the right option, though. So we have to one thing that I always say is, there's that comment that people don't like change, but if I was to put $1 million in front of you right now, I'm quite certain you would like the change. So we need to just position it in a way.
It's hard though.
It is.
Because
it's a long-term thing. People can only see
too far ahead. Change, therefore, the perception of pain in the short term. Some dreary years where it's just hard work.
But with clear...
And then you've got an electoral cycle in the middle of it. That's a hard road, isn't it?
But a clear vision of where we want to be, I'm sure there's researchers and studies that can say, look, if we start now, we will see these trends in 20 years' time.
Look, I believe you can, from where I sit. But quite fairly, if you're a political leader with not just short-term pressure, but pressure by the hour to solve problems, you will say to Adrian Tembel when you walk in, if you're the Premier or the opposition leader, when you've got time, Adrian, you might be right, and let me think about it, but you'll go back quite fairly to your day-to-day pressures, and you'll lose sight of what I'm talking about. So I will never criticise any political leaders, because they've got such pressure on them. But that's why you and I are here, to try and create the momentum to make it easier for them to contemplate these types of bold policies.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I'm not electing a government into a position or into power because I'm worried about what's happening in the next 4 years. I'm electing it because I believe that they're going to benefit this state.
Well, you might, but, we might be lucky where we have the luxury of thinking long term. Most South Australians don't have that luxury. It's a day-to-day.
Have we asked them?
Well, I'm not the expert.
Yeah, that's true.
But my perception is that many of our South Australian, friends and colleagues don't have the luxury of thinking 4, 8 or 12 years ahead. They've got short-term pressures. So our poor political class has to balance that with irritating people like us that preach long-term
But
vision.
couldn't that be solved with some clear communication and evidence-based research?
Well, I believe so. And I believe, we might not do it perfectly, but if the themes that I'm talking about, let's just say they're right. They need to be debated and contrary voices. There'll be plenty of them. And I'm not saying I've got a monopoly on good policy, but I'd like to think that this is an important contribution to make. Once there's a little momentum there, little shifts in our public sector thinking, and then our political class, and then our media, and then our university, the economic faculties. Yes, we can get there. And obviously, we believe we can. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be spending a Friday morning that's sunny and beautiful in this room. But we should never say it's easy, and we should never be disrespectful of the leadership out there now, because they're doing it's hard work for them.
I agree. I just think, and I know this to be true, with clear vision and clear communication, transparent communication. Right now, we've got majority of South Australia looking who don't think long term, because they don't do that in their own lives. But if we were to show them the opportunities that South Australia could be, right, and show them two paths. Hey, everyone, we're going down this path, or if we change a few things, we go down this path. Which future would you like to live in? Wouldn't the results just speak for themselves?
It makes logical sense.
It does.
It makes logical sense. And you and I agree it. But quite fairly, someone with political expertise would say, that's a challenge, and we've only got so many hours in the day. So look, I'm not defending the political class. You're not criticising them either.
No.
We're having an educated discussion, I believe, about the state that we love. And what's brilliant about, I think, this discussion, I just hope some people listen to it, is that it's
We've got a bit of a following.
But it's these. No, I wasn't being disrespectful to you. I was laughing at myself. But it's these types of debates that we desperately want. And the answer's always going to be somewhere in the middle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because as I said, you're not, well, I'm not. I don't have a monopoly on great knowledge. But there's probably something in there. There's probably something in current policies that I'm maybe undervaluing. But somewhere in the middle might be the answer, and that will get us to a better place. So we need to continuously challenge and debate these issues in a respectful way.
Yeah. So you brought up earlier one of the policies, precincts and infrastructure. Can we touch on that, because we've got some amazing things like Lot 14, but I know that you have.
I'm very. If we were Switzerland, and we had deep pockets, I'd say we shouldn't have just built Tonsley. We should have built another 2 down there, and we shouldn't have just done Lot 14. We should have done Lot 15 and 16 and 17. But we're not. We've got fiscal challenges. And I want to put it this way. Again, Lot 14, Tonsley, Mawson Lakes, there's been other precincts set up in this state before, and there's many of them set up around the world in other states. They are well-intentioned. They're governments saying, we want to do something to modernise this economy. Let's create a hub, and it's tangible, and you can see it, and the people can relate to it. And so it's been done over and over again. But there are so many studies now that show that they almost never work. And just think about this anecdotally. What is Tonsley? Tonsley is an old car factory where the government has acquired it, and it's subdivided the land up, and it's attracted tenants. Flinders University moved people there or created new buildings there that they would have done elsewhere. They would have done it, just a question of where they went. TAFEs are the same thing. What has it added to the private sector's ability to build buildings for tenants? Then you say, and Lot 14 is the same. We've got a CBD. There's vacancy in the CBD. Did we need to create new commercial space? That's my question. I'd say no. The second question is, yes, but it creates some unique proximity between these tenants that means they do special things. And I must say, I do laugh at that because in a digital world, a globally connected world that is digital, increasingly work from home, are you seriously telling me that we need governments to create buildings where tenants meet each other in the hallway? Are you seriously suggesting that a central business district or people on a Facebook page can't do that themselves? Or if government wants to stimulate collaboration, there's a much cheaper way of doing it, isn't there? You could just hire a room for the day and invite everyone in for drinks and let them get to know each other, and they'll exchange their, I'm not a social media person, but their TikTok or their Instagram references, and off they go. Do we need to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and take a whole lot of the government's focus to create new buildings when the private sector has created plenty and it's called a CBD?
Yes, I understand your point,
Sure.
but we know that you do not learn something in a one-day workshop. You do not create trusting relationships in a one-day workshop. You do not spitball and come up with ideas in a one-day gathering or a couple of workshops here and there. It is being in a community. It's a petri dish for innovation. That's what they're trying to do, is it not?
It is. And in theory, it sounds great. But then when you think about the money spent in creating a little mini CBD when we've already got one, you have to say to yourself, wasn't there an easier and cheaper way to bring people together when, as I said, high tech is global?
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that if you talk to most high tech companies in Adelaide, Australia, or the world, they'll rarely be focusing on just what's around them. They'll have collaborations all around the world with the best people.
Yeah.
So that's the case already. But digital is only enhancing that. And so I say, why would you spend your money reproducing physical form that's brittle and that already exists?
Yep. So that aside,
and if you were super rich, great, don't do it.
Yeah,
but we're not.
That aside, though, has it been successful?
I don't know. And this is the point. Do we know the cost of these precincts? And that's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think you'll find it very difficult to know the true cost of Tonsley.
Yeah, well, what's the return on investment?
And then, therefore, if you don't know the cost, how can you begin to understand the benefits? And also, what would have happened if you did something different? It's easy to say, we created X numbers of jobs, but that money that you spent could have created so many more jobs, perhaps, if you used it more productively or efficiently. So I'm not the first person to challenge precincts. There's recently been a book written on it.
Oh, really?
With case studies that's very skeptical by an ex-CSIRO expert in the field. So I'm not original in my thinking, but what I hope is that we properly do a cost benefit so we get the policy settings right in the future. And I will never criticise those that have driven this in the past. Previous premiers have been advocates for Tonsley and Lot 14, and it's well-intentioned. And they believed in what they were doing, and I'm sure great things have been achieved. But I question whether it was the best use of money.
I want to play devil's advocate here for 1 sec. There's some remarkable things happening down there. Fintech. There's the tech and fintech industry. There's the defence and space. Yeah. There's some amazing stuff, and from the outside it looks like it's buzzing. And when you actually walk in, I have a lot of meetings down there, and it's a really exciting space to be in. And you speak to the people who are there, and they love it, and they say we have the potential to change the world here, just being in this environment. Are you suggesting that there is no benefit from that?
No, of course there's a benefit, but could have that been achieved far more cheaply?
Okay.
When you've got buildings through the whole city where walking, a block isn't that difficult. Certainly in a digital world, it's not.
Well, I mean, you came here today.
Yeah, exactly. That business, I keep saying CBD. It's an old invention. The town square is an old invention. The private sector does it really well. We have commercial agents that find new tenancies really, really quickly. All of that exists. Yeah. Do you need to reproduce a mini version of that on the other side of the road from the CBD or in the in the southern suburbs? is that money well spent in a fiscally constrained world, in a world where, and I'll come to something constructive in a moment, where that money could be spent on something more productive, and you say, what? Well, let me tell you. What startups want, most importantly, they want new customers. So I would say to you, maybe you will attract more startups to South Australia if the state government is more innovative in its procurement and allocates more money to buying innovative tech products. You know, that might be more appealing.
I'll second that.
You know, so that's point one. The second point is you will attract startups to South Australia if they come here to work with great people. So if there's a great research institute that is generating some of the best animation technology in the world, you'll get animation companies coming here, and they won't need a precinct to attract them. They will say, I'm moving to Portland or I'm moving to Hollywood because they've got the best film industry there or the best tech industry, and I want to be around there. Silicon Valley, we all talk about that. They won't say to you, Dad, I'm moving to Silicon Valley because this is an amazing building. They'll say, I want to be around these people. So I say, you'll attract the people to Adelaide if you're doing great work, and you don't need to spend hundreds of millions on precincts to do it. That's what I'm saying. And just one idea, you're more likely to attract them if they can work with a research group that's world-class, the best PhDs in the world. So spend some of that, if you save money on Tonsley or Lot 14, spend money on creating that Fraunhofer Mark II.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And second, maybe they can win a government contract and they say, we're moving to Adelaide because we've picked up our first big customer contract and we're going to go near our customer. And remember, to anyone listening, these Fraunhofer institutes can be called, you know, the Malinowskis Institute one day, or they can be called, you know, named after the opposition leader. So this is what they'll write books about. I don't think it'll be the precincts that they write books about.
It'll change the way we do things. So, out of curiosity, and last question on this precinct stuff: if a unicorn business comes out like a Canberra and Atlassian, given they're the biggest businesses to sort of, and you know, not so much BHP, but like Atlassian, this tech type scenario, tech type business comes out, and it's a unicorn business, will that be of benefit to South Australia?
I'm so glad you asked that. I want you to think about this scenario. It's not theoretical. Can you imagine what this city would be like if we were the headquarters of one of the world's, if not the world's, biggest and most powerful media companies? Just think about that for a moment. Can you imagine what Adelaide would be like if it was the headquarters for News Corp and Fox? Think about Rupert Murdoch, never forget this. He started here, it's going back probably 60 years. I think he was in his early 20s, 90s. Could be up to 60 or 70 years now. And he started in Adelaide. And up until about 20 years ago, we were still technically the head office town of News Corp. So can you, and what he did, just so you know, he started, you know, he inherited the afternoon newspaper here called The News. And then he took over, you know, the Advertiser, and he built it into a national. He then moved to Sydney as he built a national arm, and then he moved to London as he dominated the UK, and then he moved to New York, he dominated the world effectively. Imagine if he had stayed here. Do you know what the News Corp head office is like, or what the Fox head? I mean, we're talking thousands of some of the most smartest, well-paid, sexiest people in the world are. Now, you don't. So I answer your question that way. Imagine if he had stayed here and done it from Adelaide. Now, I'm going to say two more things. He probably couldn't have.
Population.
Well, not population. I don't think it's population. I don't think he could have ever built what he did, the most extraordinary Australian commercial achievement, I think, in the history of Australia. One man creates arguably the most powerful media empire in the world. It doesn't get enough credit. But from Adelaide, from an Adelaide newspaper. He probably couldn't have done it from Adelaide because he would have been too far away from the customers, I think. Sydney, then London. He needed to be near them. The nature of his industry. But let's just say Rupert Murdoch had started off in pharmaceutical. Let's just say he started off with a single drug. Now, he could have done that from Adelaide. He could have built the next GSK, the next Pfizer in Adelaide, because that's an industry where you can be based If you look at the German companies, the French, they can be based quite a long way away from their customers because it's the industrial hub where they make things, where they do the research. That could have been done. So there's your answer. One man or one woman could transform this state if they took a little afternoon newspaper, if it was, say, industrial, and they take on the world. So it can be done, and it's been done, but a number of businesses have sold out of Bel Air. I mean, Robert de Crespigny, I've mentioned before, built a $4 billion gold company from here, sold it 20 years ago. If he'd kept going, some people say that company would be worth now probably about $100 billion. If it was still here in Adelaide, it would have changed the city. So in answer to your question, it's possible that this place can be transformed just by one or two Atlassians, fundamentally.
Yeah, I love it.
Now, you might say, oh, Adrian, doesn't that mean we just sit back and wait for the next Rupert Murdoch? You need to have 500 people that are potentially like him, and then one might come through the system. It's like becoming an Olympic gold medalist.
But then having government policy to entice them to stay here.
Create so many of them.
Yeah.
Make them loved.
Yeah.
But we're not going to create Hollywood here.
No.
We're not going to create the next media empire, but we can create industrial powerhouses in technology, whether it's, the things that we're pursuing at Lot 14, great credit, whether it's AI or cyber. But my argument is to get there, you're going to need to build the research education hubs and spend your money more on that than on buildings.
So just to clarify what we've been talking about, we have a fiscal problem.
Yep.
We have a growth problem.
Yep.
And your idea and thought process is that research and education are the two critical things we need to think about working on to fix them.
On the growth problem and then on the fiscal problem, we need bipartisan discussion on debt levels, and then we need reform.
Okay.
And I believe we need reform of our spending priorities, which includes government.
So in all that, it's very clear right now, and let's take the research and education piece aside, it's very clear right now that South Australia hasn't quite made up its mind what it wants to be when we grow up, right? We've got a bit of everything going on here.
Yeah. Look, I can't answer that because I've never done the work and I don't have the expertise to say whether it's sensible for us to focus on a small number of industrial areas. I suspect it is. It makes sense to me that you can't be a hero in everything and you need to focus on strengths. That's all very logical. I accept all of that. I think our current government will say, and it might be valid, that defence, hydrogen / renewables are at least two of our priorities. And I think that's probably a sensible thing to do. But to get there, if we are in those areas, I think two is a little bit thin. And secondly, it will need, a high level of investment in what I was saying before, the research and expertise around those areas that will allow them to be successful and not just hope that we will magically win additional investment in those areas. So I think my answer to you is we need to work more on what our strengths are and make some choices. But I don't know exactly whether that's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. I'm not sure.
But are those choices in exports? Is that like an industrial sense, or can it be in tech, or what? Or is it all just one ecosystem? What does that look like?
Well, they're areas of innovation, obviously. They're areas of, we always talk about biotech.
Which we have a great company here in South Australia called Biobank, which is doing a wonderful thing.
No, we've got a great history of medical research. Human health is areas as the world gets bigger and richer and older. Healthcare solutions are in demand. Obviously, defence technologies are in demand as well because we are entering into an unstable geopolitical period. Clean energy is obviously in demand. Dealing with cyber risk and the evolution of computing technology into quantum and AI is obviously likely to be in demand as well. Nothing original there. But exactly how we position ourselves and how we would establish our greater level of applied research activity, my Malinowskis Institute, the Fraunhofer Institute, Malinowskis Institute. Exactly what they focus on and how they design. A lot of work needs to be done, but I'm stimulating the idea.
Yeah. Are you the only one beating this drum?
I'm sure I'm not. I'm sure there's plenty of people that at least privately would be, and some maybe more actively. But I hope more and more people will. or if they disagree and have alternative solutions or issues, I hope this draws them out as well.
Given the statistics that you've read out today, is it too late to turn the ship around?
It's never too late in Australia because we're protected by federation.
Mhm.
So as we contract, we're still subsidised by Canberra. And so as a result, we still have our GST allocations. We've still got a few more politicians in Canberra than our population suggests. So we do contract, but it happens slowly because we're underwritten. And of course, we've still got the mining royalties from Olympic Dam. We've still got agriculture generating tax revenues. We've got some hedge. But do you want slow decline? Do you want it to just steadily continue the way it has and for us to just slowly get poorer and slowly get poorer? No.
No, absolutely not.
So there won't be a disaster. We're not going to go bankrupt. The world's not going to end. But I think we'll continue to decline unless we change. And change means accepting long-term solutions and the need for us to roll our sleeves up.
So in essence, we've got quite a good foundation to build on.
Of course we have. We're South Australians.
Yeah.
We're blessed.
Yeah, we
Look
are.
at all this land.
Yeah.
I think we get $300 million of mining royalties every year, before we get out of bed. All that agricultural activity, all that beautiful land. Federation, I've repeated it, but we're lucky.
So for those listening right now who don't sit in a leadership position within the state or don't, are civilians who are sitting in the backbench, not really having any influence on the decisions that are made, what can we do? Like there would be people sitting right now saying, I don't want to, I don't want those trends to continue. What can I do? What can we do?
I hope that people more and more will engage on these issues, ask what the costs are of our economic policies, ask for evidence of what they're doing, and ask on, the questions of whether this is the best use of our precious funds, precious taxpayer dollars, to drive our economy forward, and ask also, are there alternative options and views that we can weigh up and vote on at elections.
So when you're talking to those people right now saying ask those questions, who are you pointing your finger at?
Oh,
is it industry leaders, business leaders?
Well, everybody.
I mean, but you're not going to get that from the front line because they don't think about economic policy.
I accept that. I accept that, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And my job, it's in my terms of reference as the chairman of the Productivity Commission, is my job in part is to communicate what I believe or the commission believes are the economic issues of the day, so you try. And maybe no one will ever listen to a word I say, more than likely. But you try and you get your word out and you keep saying what you believe is right.
What happens if people don't?
When people are getting door knocked by their local MP, ask.
Yeah.
I hope some people do.
Well, if what you're saying today, and I know you're going to continue pushing this agenda, but what happens if they don't listen? In your world, what happens to you?
So what do you mean by that?
What if you're not going to have the influence that you can?
No, at some point you'll say, look, I'm not having any impact, and I need to either change myself and do it better, or accept that I'm never going to have any impact and maybe encourage someone else who will to take over. But I'm young enough and energetic enough to keep pushing these views and debating the issues and to see whether there might be something useful in what I say.
So there will be industry leaders and CEOs and people in positions of power listening to this podcast. What's your message to them in order to support, or, they might not all need to support, but in order to support the growth of South Australia?
Well, many people will disagree with me and they'll say, Adrian, you're a knocker and you're being a little bit divisive and you're negatively impacting on confidence.
Okay.
And so therefore, you should talk about the good things that are going on. And I say, I will talk about the good things, but I'm not going to get caught up in anecdotes and one-off examples and opinions. Present facts and shut me down with long-term evidence that shows that we're not in decline. Shut me down with long-term evidence that shows that our policies are working. And then I'll become a member of the cheer squad. But my job isn't just to be nice. My job isn't to try and be popular. If I want to be popular, I go into politics.
Yeah.
I'm not. That's not my job. I've got to be honest and real. And do you appease a dictator and just say, "Oh yes, dictator, you're great"? No, you got to challenge. And so I'm not. By the way, I'm not comparing our state government policies with that.
No.
But I'll just use that as an example of appeasement. Sometimes you've just got to stand up and be real and accept that you're not going to be popular. I hope to be in time, maybe respected, but let's wait and see.
So in rounding off this chat, it's been an amazing and insightful chat. So thank you. I want to give you some air on what your thought processes are moving forward, and if there is anything that you feel like you haven't covered off, I would love.
No, I don't think. No, look, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak and to have this on the record. And for it to be scrutinised and challenged. I have a huge optimism that the South Australian political class has the capacity to have imagination and to look closely at the facts, and over time make choices that I think are the right choices. I'm not saying that they've done it incorrectly to date, but I do think we have to continue to evolve and change, and I hope that there are a few people listening in, and this might have some impact in the way they implement their public lives.
Brilliant. So as we walk out the room today, what are you going to continue doing to support this and to keep beating this drum?
Oh, look, I spend most of my week running a very important business that I'm very passionate about, and I allocate spare time for this role that I make, and I'm just going to keep taking every random opportunity to do more analysis, more thinking, more debating, and more communication. And I wish I had the whole week to do it, but I don't. And so I'll just keep trying to use my time as productively as possible and hopefully just be slightly useful to South Australia.
Brilliant. Thank you for everything that you're doing, and thank you for raising. I know one thing that you have said time and time again is that you may be the unpopular person coming out of this, but we need to challenge. It's through these sort of things that can create great change. So I appreciate the work that you and the team are doing at the Productivity Commission.
Pleasure, and thank you for having me on.
Thanks, everyone. We will wrap that up now, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to the podcast all. You can check out the show notes if there was anything of interest to you, and find out more about us at SynergyIQ.com.au. I am going to ask though, if you did like the podcast, it would absolutely mean the world to me if you could subscribe, rate and review. And if you didn't like it, that's all right too. There's no need to do anything. Take care, guys. All the best.